My husband slapped me to humiliate me, but he had no idea my mother owned the empire he was begging to save. My name is Nia. I'm 34 years old, and on the night of my 10th wedding anniversary, my mother-in-law humiliated me in front of 50 of our most influential guests. She stood up, tapped her crystal glass, and projected my private infertility diagnosis onto the wall of a five-star restaurant. She called me a charity case who couldn't even give her son an heir. I didn't cry. I simply wiped my mouth, stood up, and pulled out a medical file of my own that would destroy her son's entire existence. Before continuing this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to people who underestimated your worth. Growing up in the rough neighborhoods of South Atlanta, I learned early that nobody was coming to save me. My childhood was defined by tiny apartments and the constant hum of city buses outside my window. I worked 2 jobs just to pay for community college, eventually earning a scholarship to a prestigious university where I received my degree and built a successful nonprofit organization. That's where I met Andre. Back then, he was a student with big dreams and empty pockets. I loved his ambition. I paid for his college education by working extra shifts and waiting tables, believing we were building an empire together. I poured every ounce of my energy into making sure he succeeded. When we got married, I thought I had found my forever family. But his mother, Vivian, made sure I knew exactly where I stood. Vivian acted like old money royalty. She wore expensive pearls, hosted lavish charity galas, and looked down on anyone who didn't have a trust fund. To her, I was just a girl from the projects who had somehow tricked her brilliant son into marriage. She never missed a chance to remind me of my roots. She gave backhanded compliments about my hair, criticized my table manners, and constantly asked when I was going to bless the family with a child to continue their prestigious legacy. Fast forward to our 10th anniversary. Andre insisted on renting out the entire private dining room at the Belmont, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the white tablecloths and expensive floral arrangements. 50 guests attended, including wealthy investors, local politicians, and members of Vivian's elite social clubs. Andre was in his element, wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo and moving through the room shaking hands and securing investments for his new tech startup. His brother Damon and sister-in-law Chloe sat near the front, whispering and laughing every time they looked in my direction. I should have known something was wrong, but I wanted to believe the night was about celebrating our love and everything we had built. Halfway through the 5-course dinner, Vivian stood from her seat at the head of the table. She tapped her silver spoon against her champagne glass, the sharp sound silencing the room. She smoothed down her designer dress and offered the crowd a wide, fake smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "thank you all for gathering here tonight to celebrate 10 years of marriage between my son Andre and his wife, Nia. It is certainly a milestone, but as a mother, my heart longs for the future of our family." A sudden knot formed in my stomach. Andre sat beside me staring straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact. Vivian gestured toward the back of the room, and suddenly the lights dimmed. A projector flickered on, casting a massive image across the spotless white wall behind our table. Gasps spread through the room. It was an enlarged copy of a confidential medical document from my gynecologist. The words severe endometriosis and high probability of infertility were highlighted in bright yellow marker for everyone to see. The room exploded into whispers. Some guests covered their mouths in horror, while others leaned forward to read the private details of my body. Chloe let out a loud, dramatic sigh of fake sympathy. Damon took a slow sip of his drink with a smug smile stretched across his face. Vivian turned to face me directly, her eyes cold and calculating. "We all know Andre comes from a long line of successful and proud men," Vivian announced, her voice echoing through the silent room. "He deserves a woman who can give him an heir, a woman worthy of his bloodline. Instead, he has spent 10 years chained to a charity case from the projects who can't even fulfill her most basic biological duty. Nia, we tried to accept you. We truly did. But you're a broken branch on our family tree. It's time for you to step aside and allow my son to build a real family." The silence afterward was deafening. I looked at Andre, expecting my husband of 10 years to leap from his chair, scream at his mother, and defend my honor. Instead, he simply stared at his plate and adjusted his expensive watch. I knew then that he had allowed this to happen. He had probably handed her the documents from my private drawer himself. A hot wave of humiliation rushed through me, threatening to drown me. But the tears never came. The frightened little girl from the projects was gone. In her place stood a woman who had survived far worse than a malicious socialite. I took a slow breath, picked up my linen napkin, and gently wiped the corners of my mouth. Then I stood up. The screech of my chair echoed loudly against the wooden floor. Every eye in the room locked onto me, expecting me to run out crying. "Wow," I said calmly, my voice steady. "That was quite a speech. But since we're airing out family secrets tonight, let's make sure we empty the entire basket." I stepped away from the table and stood directly beneath the projector light, allowing the medical diagnosis to spill across my dress. "You talk a lot about legacy and bloodlines," I continued, making eye contact with the wealthy investors nearby. "You call me a charity case, but what these lovely guests don't know is that your precious old money fortune is nothing more than a mountain of credit card debt." I turned toward Vivian and watched the color drain from her face. "I know about the third mortgage on your estate, Vivian. I know about the collection notices you hide at the bottom of your designer handbags. Your entire high society lifestyle is a mirage built on loans you cannot repay." Vivian gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Shut your mouth," she hissed, dropping the sweet grandmother act entirely. I ignored her and turned toward my husband, whose eyes were now wide with panic. "And you, Andre, the brilliant tech executive, do you want to tell your investors how you really got your start? Because I clearly remember working double shifts at a restaurant to pay your tuition when you were about to drop out of school. I remember buying the suit you wore to your first interview. I built you from the ground up while your family contributed nothing but complaints." Andre shot to his feet, his face red with anger. "Nia, stop talking right now," he demanded, trying and failing to sound authoritative. "You're making a scene. You're embarrassing yourself." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Embarrassing myself? Your mother projected my private medical records onto a wall, and you think I'm the one causing embarrassment." I reached into my designer purse and pulled out a fresh manila envelope. I had found it 3 days earlier, hidden inside Andre's car glove compartment, but I had been waiting for the right moment to confront him about it. It seemed Vivian had just provided the perfect stage. "You see, everyone," I announced, raising the envelope, "my mother-in-law is right about one thing. I was diagnosed with a medical condition that makes conception difficult, but not impossible. In fact, our doctor told us a year ago that we were perfectly capable of having a child with the proper treatments. But month after month, test after test, nothing happened." Vivian blamed me. Andre let her blame me, until I found this. I opened the envelope and pulled out the crisp white document inside. I walked toward the audio-visual table where Damon was sitting, shoved him aside, and placed my paper directly over Vivian's projection on the glass projector plate. The image on the wall instantly changed. Vivian's cruel display disappeared, replaced by the official letterhead of a prominent Atlanta urology clinic. The entire room collectively leaned forward. I read the words aloud, my voice sharp and steady over the stunned silence. Patient name, Andre Sterling. Diagnosis, complete and irreversible sterility caused by a severe childhood illness. Andre cannot have children. He is known for over a year. The collective gasp from the 50 guests was so loud it sounded as though all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. Chloe dropped her phone onto the floor. Damon stared at the wall in complete shock. Vivian collapsed back into her chair, clutching her chest as though she had been physically struck. She looked at Andre with wide eyes filled with betrayal. "Andre, is this true?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Andre shook with rage and humiliation. His perfect image, his masculine pride, the foundation of his entire fake persona, shattered completely in front of the exact people he needed to impress. He looked around the room, seeing pity and disgust in the eyes of the investors and fraternity brothers he had spent months trying to charm. He had no words, no defense. The truth was glowing in bright yellow light directly behind him. "You let me carry the blame," I said, staring at the man I had loved for 10 years. "You let your mother tear me apart day after day, year after year, while knowing the entire time that you were the one who was infertile. You're a coward, Andre. A small, pathetic coward." The silence was thick and absolute. I didn't wait for an answer. I calmly returned to my seat, picked up my purse, and looked at the family that had tried to destroy me. Then I leaned forward, slid my 10-carat diamond wedding ring off my finger, and dropped it into Vivian's half-empty champagne glass. It sank to the bottom with a soft clink. "Enjoy your legacy," I said. Then I turned and walked out of the private dining room with my head held high, leaving them to drown in the absolute chaos I had unleashed. I had only taken 3 steps toward the heavy oak doors when a hand clamped around my wrist like a steel vise. The grip was so painful it sent a sharp wave of pain shooting up my arm. Before I could pull away, Andre yanked me around violently. His face, usually so polished and composed for cameras and wealthy associates, was twisted into a mask of pure, uncontrolled rage. Veins bulged against the stiff white collar of his custom tuxedo. Sweat poured down his face as the illusion of his perfect life shattered in front of him. "You crazy witch," Andre hissed, his voice shaking with panic and fury. "You think you can come in here and humiliate me in front of my investors? You think you can fake a medical document and destroy my entire life?" I looked down at the hand crushing my wrist, then slowly back into his eyes. My expression stayed completely blank. "Let me go, Andre. You're only making this worse for yourself." But he was already too far gone. The whispers of panic from the crowd, the disgusted looks from the venture capitalists he had spent months flattering, the silence from his fraternity brothers, it was too much for his fragile ego to handle. He needed control back immediately. He needed to put the girl from the projects back in her place. Andre raised his right hand and slapped me across the face. The sound of his palm hitting my cheek cracked through the silent room like a gunshot. The force snapped my head sideways and sent me stumbling backward. My high heels caught on the edge of the plush dining room carpet, and I dropped my designer purse just to grab an empty chair and stop myself from crashing onto the floor. A horrified gasp swept across all 50 guests. Someone near the back dropped a wine glass. The sound of shattering crystal perfectly mirrored the destruction of our 10-year marriage. A sharp metallic taste instantly flooded my mouth. I touched my trembling fingers to my lower lip and pulled them away to see a thick smear of bright red blood. My own husband had just violently assaulted me in front of half of Atlanta's elite. "Oh my God, Andre," one of the wives of a major investor exclaimed, covering her mouth in horror. "We are leaving right now. This is completely unacceptable." Chairs scraped aggressively across the hardwood floor as people rushed to grab their coats and leave. The carefully constructed, flawless Sterling family image was collapsing right in front of everyone's eyes. But instead of apologizing or showing even the slightest hint of remorse for hitting his wife, Andre puffed out his chest. He stood tall, breathing heavily, desperately trying to look like the dominant alpha male he wanted the world to believe he was. And right on cue, his toxic family rushed to protect their golden boy. Damon, who had been sitting in stunned silence moments earlier, suddenly jumped to his feet. He pointed an accusing finger directly at me. "Don't listen to her," Damon shouted across the room, his voice loud and desperate as he tried to control the damage for the fleeing investors. "She's lying to all of you. That medical document on the wall is completely fake. She printed it off the internet to ruin his reputation. My brother is a perfectly healthy man. She's just a bitter, infertile woman trying to destroy his big night because she's jealous of his business success." Chloe, never one to miss an opportunity to tear me apart, immediately jumped in behind her husband. She rushed out from behind the long table, her cheap sequined dress glittering beneath the expensive chandeliers. "She's mentally unstable," Chloe yelled aggressively at the crowd while grabbing the arm of a local politician trying to slip out the side door. "Nia has been losing her mind for months because she can't give Andre a baby. She's trying to extort our family. She's a complete scam artist. Just look at her standing there. She's practically insane." I slowly straightened up, completely ignoring the sharp throbbing pain radiating through my left cheek. I didn't scream at them. I didn't waste my breath defending myself from their pathetic, desperate lies. And most importantly, I did not shed a single tear. I had promised myself a long time ago that nobody in this evil family would ever have the privilege of seeing me cry. I glanced briefly at Vivian, who was still collapsed in her chair at the head of the table, staring at her son in absolute horror. She knew the truth. She knew the medical document on the projector was real. And now she knew her precious son was a violent monster. I turned my calm gaze back toward Andre. He stood there with his chest heaving, his fist still clenched at his side. He was waiting for me to break down. Waiting for me to shrink, apologize, and show the weakness he had exploited for an entire decade. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my tailored blazer and pulled out a white silk handkerchief. I calmly wiped the blood from my chin, folded the cloth once, and tossed the stained handkerchief directly onto the tip of his expensive leather shoe. "I'll be contacting my lawyers first thing in the morning," I said. My voice was dangerously soft, yet it echoed perfectly through the rapidly emptying room. "And Andre, good luck raising capital for your little startup once word spreads across the city that you hit women in the face whenever they expose your lies." Then I turned around, pushed open the heavy oak doors with both hands, and walked out into the grand lobby. The restaurant manager stared at me wide-eyed. He had clearly heard the commotion but didn't dare step into my way. I kept my head high, my posture perfectly straight, and confidently walked out through the front doors of the Belmont. The warm, luxurious air of the restaurant was instantly replaced by the freezing sting of a sudden Atlanta storm. Rain poured down in heavy gray sheets, bouncing off the pavement and flooding the city drains. The young valet hurried forward with a large black umbrella, his face filled with genuine concern when he noticed the angry red mark rapidly forming on my face. "Ma'am, please let me bring your car around," he offered quickly, trying to shield me from the storm. "Please step back under the awning. You're going to freeze out here." "No thank you," I replied softly, offering him a small polite smile. "I won't be driving tonight." I walked directly past him and stepped out into the pouring rain. The icy water instantly soaked through my designer blazer, ruined my silk blouse, and plastered my dark hair against my face. I walked down the block, away from the bright lights of the restaurant entrance, until the chaotic sounds from the dining room completely disappeared beneath the white noise of the raging storm. I finally stopped beneath a flickering street lamp on the corner of Peachtree Street and let the rain drench me completely. The physical pain in my cheek was nothing compared to the burning determination rising deep inside my chest. Standing there in the darkness, soaked and bleeding from the mouth, I was violently pulled back into a memory from 20 years earlier. I was 14 years old, standing on the cracked pavement of the public housing complex where I grew up. It had been raining hard that night too. I was holding a black garbage bag filled with the only clothes I owned, watching a man my mother trusted speed away in a battered old sedan, taking every dollar of our rent money and savings with him. I vividly remembered the look of complete, crushing defeat in my mother's eyes. The way she collapsed onto the concrete steps outside our apartment building, sobbing uncontrollably because a man had shattered her spirit and stripped away her power. I remembered making a silent promise to myself that very night, digging my nails so deeply into my palms that they actually bled. I swore I would never end up like that. I would never let a man control my future. I would never allow anyone to strip me of my dignity, my finances, or my self-worth. For the past 10 years, I had played the role of the supportive, quiet, obedient wife, constantly suppressing my own fire just to keep Andre warm. I had compromised my own brilliance and ambition to protect his fragile male ego from ever feeling threatened. I had silently endured his mother's endless cruelty just to maintain peace within a family that never truly wanted me. Never again. The slap hadn't broken me. It had awakened me from a 10-year nightmare. Andre thought he had put me back in my place tonight, but all he had really done was unleash a predator. I reached into my soaked pocket and pulled out my cell phone. Miraculously, the screen still lit up despite the heavy rain pouring onto the glass. My thumb hovered over the keypad. For years, I had hidden a massive, life-changing secret from Andre, his horrible family, and the rest of the world. I had built my own life and nonprofit organization completely from scratch because I wanted to prove I could succeed entirely on my own. I had intentionally distanced myself from the one person whose shadow was so enormous it could swallow the sun itself. I wanted a normal life, a normal marriage, a quiet love untouched by billions of dollars and ruthless corporate power. But normal was gone. Normal had died on the floor of that restaurant dining room. I scrolled past my lawyer's number, past my closest friends, and dialed a number I hadn't called in more than 6 months. The line rang twice before she answered. Nia, a woman's voice said. Her voice was smooth, commanding, and carried the kind of authority that could freeze an entire boardroom of executives. It's very late. Is everything all right? I closed my eyes, letting the cold rain mix with the warm blood still dripping from my split lip. Mom, I whispered into the phone, my voice finally cracking just slightly. I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. Please come get me. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. Then her tone changed instantly from casual concern to deadly seriousness. Where are you? I'm outside the Belmont on Peachtree Street. He hit me, Mom. Andre hit me. I heard a sharp inhale through the speaker, immediately followed by the sound of a heavy chair scraping violently across a wooden floor. Stay exactly where you are, my mother ordered, her voice turning into pure, unforgiving ice. Do not speak to anyone. Do not answer his calls. I'm coming right now. Then she hung up without another word. I lowered the phone and slipped it back into my wet pocket. I stood alone beneath the street lamp, feeling the freezing wind whip against my soaked clothes, but I didn't shiver even once. I felt more alive and more dangerous than I had in a decade. Less than 10 minutes later, the deep growl of a powerful engine cut through the roar of the rain. A sleek black Maybach with tinted windows rounded the corner and glided down the street like a shark moving through dark water. The luxury car ignored the valet stand entirely and stopped directly at the curb in front of me. The heavy rear door opened smoothly. Soft ambient lighting glowed across the rich leather interior. I stepped out of the freezing rain and slid into the back seat, shutting the heavy door behind me. The storm outside vanished instantly, replaced by the quiet, dangerous hum of absolute power. And as the Maybach drove into the night toward my new reality, I knew Andre Sterling's reign was officially over. The morning sun blazed violently across the sky when I returned to the sprawling suburban estate I had called home for the past 5 years. I had instructed my mother's driver to drop me off at the end of the cul-de-sac. I didn't want Andre or his family seeing the Maybach yet. Let them continue believing I was nothing more than a helpless, ruined woman with nowhere to go. As I walked up the long manicured driveway, the first thing I noticed was the sharp contrast against the perfectly trimmed green lawn. Heavy black garbage bags had been carelessly scattered across the front yard. Some had burst open, spilling my tailored business suits, silk scarves, and favorite pairs of shoes across the damp morning grass. It was a pathetic, childish display of dominance. Andre wasn't even brave enough to face me in daylight. Instead, he had sent his attack dogs to do the dirty work. Standing on the massive wraparound porch, sipping oversized porcelain mugs of coffee, were Damon and Chloe. Chloe was wearing a luxurious cashmere robe I had bought her last Christmas, her hair perfectly styled as though she had been waiting for this exact moment for hours. Damon leaned casually against the white wooden railing with his usual arrogant grin, dressed in a custom-tailored suit worth more than his actual accounting skills. "Well, look who finally decided to show her face," Chloe called out, her voice slicing through the quiet suburban morning. She took a slow sip of coffee and leaned farther over the railing, pure delight dancing in her eyes. "Andre told us you ran out of the restaurant last night like a stray cat. We were starting to wonder if you had already crawled back to the projects. We even checked the local news to see if you'd been arrested for causing a scene at the Belmont." I ignored her completely. I calmly walked up the concrete steps, carefully stepping over a garbage bag filled with my winter coats. My posture stayed perfectly straight, my face unreadable and calm. I looked past Chloe and focused entirely on her husband. "Where's Andre?" I asked, my voice steady and emotionless. Damon chuckled as he set his coffee mug down on a small side table. "My brother is resting. He had a very stressful night dealing with your little public meltdown. He's upstairs sleeping right now, and afterward he has an important board meeting to prepare for this afternoon." Chloe and I were specifically asked to make sure the trash was taken out before he woke up. Damon lazily gestured toward the black garbage bags scattered across the lawn. "He wants you off the property before he comes downstairs. He can't stand looking at you after the disgusting stunt you pulled last night." I kept my eyes fixed on Damon. "I'm here to pack the rest of my belongings, get my laptop from the home office, and collect the financial records for my nonprofit organization. Then I'm leaving. You can tell your brother his pathetic eviction stunt is unnecessary." Damon laughed again, a harsh grating sound that echoed off the brick exterior of the house. He slipped a hand into his suit jacket pocket and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper. Then he slowly walked down the porch steps, stopping exactly one step above me so he could physically look down on me. "You won't be going into the home office, Nia," Damon said, his voice dripping with condescension. "And you definitely won't be taking any financial records. In fact, I decided to save you the trouble of checking your bank balances this morning." He aggressively shoved the folded paper against my chest. I unfolded the crisp white sheet. It was a printed ledger from my personal bank account along with the account statements from my educational nonprofit organization. I stared at the bold black numbers. My personal savings account, money I had carefully saved over more than a decade, showed exactly $0. The operating fund for my nonprofit, which contained grant money intended for scholarships and school supplies for underprivileged children in South Atlanta, also showed $0. I see you're finally speechless, Damon mocked, folding his arms across his chest and rocking back on his heels. As the family's official accountant, I've always had access to the master passwords and internal routing numbers. My job is to make sure family assets are properly managed and protected from liabilities. And right now, you're a massive liability, Nia. Andre is about to secure a $50 million investment for his tech startup. He needed to show aggressive capital and flawless liquidity to his investors today. So I simply consolidated your little charity funds and personal savings into his corporate account. Consider it an early divorce settlement for wasting 10 years of my brother's life. I slowly looked up from the paper. My expression darkened. You transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars without my authorization, I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and calm. You emptied a federally registered nonprofit account. That's felony theft, Damon. That's federal wire fraud. Damon rolled his eyes, completely unimpressed by the threat. Oh, please. Stop being dramatic. You and Andre are legally married. In this state, courts view financial assets as community property. And besides, if anyone asks, I happen to have a signed authorization form approving the immediate transfer of all operational funds into Andre's holding company. It has your signature right there at the bottom. I practically traced it myself. It looks incredibly authentic. Nia, who do you think the bank is going to believe? The brilliant, wealthy tech CEO and his certified public accountant brother? Or the hysterical infertile woman who just got thrown out of her own home for forging medical records to humiliate her husband? I stood there on the steps holding the piece of paper that represented years of my blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Damon had actually done it. His arrogance had finally blinded him to his own stupidity. He had crossed the line from being a greedy, obnoxious brother-in-law into becoming a full-fledged federal criminal. He had forged my signature to steal money meant for children who grew up exactly like I did. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought his little accounting tricks made him untouchable. What Damon didn't realize was that by moving that money across state lines into Andre's corporate servers, he had just triggered direct federal jurisdiction. And he had absolutely no idea that my mother's elite forensic accounting team at Vanguard Holdings was already tracing every digital footprint he had left behind. By handing me that printed ledger, Damon had practically delivered his own signed confession. Chloe walked down the porch steps and linked her arm through her husband's, smiling at me with pure, unfiltered malice. She rested her head against Damon's shoulder and looked at me like I was something scraped off the bottom of her shoe. It's really over for you now, Nia. You have no money, no husband, and no family to go back to. You're exactly where you started 10 years ago. Absolute zero. So grab your little garbage bags from the lawn and start walking. I'm sure you can find a shared Uber to the nearest homeless shelter downtown. They probably have a hot meal waiting for you. We'll send over the divorce papers once we finish fumigating the master bedroom to get your cheap perfume smell out of the curtains. I looked at Chloe's smug, perfectly painted face. Then I looked at Damon's arrogant, triumphant grin. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't threaten to call the police. I simply smiled. It was a slow, chilling smile that never reached my eyes. The sight of it made Chloe's confident expression flicker for just a second. She shifted uncomfortably on her feet, suddenly unsure why the supposedly ruined woman standing before her looked completely in control. I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened my encrypted messaging app. I typed a short message to my personal attorney, a ruthless corporate litigator who charged $2,000 an hour and answered only to my mother. Execute Phase 1. I hit send. Then I slid the phone back into my pocket, carefully folded the forged bank ledger, and tucked it securely inside my jacket. This piece of paper wasn't a defeat. It was the exact evidence I needed to send Damon to federal prison for the next 20 years. I turned around and started walking back down the long driveway, completely ignoring the ruined clothes scattered across the lawn. I didn't need them anymore. My mother had already arranged a private fitting with a couture designer for that evening. Before reaching the street, I stopped and glanced back over my shoulder at the two of them standing proudly on the porch of the massive colonial house. They thought they owned the world. They thought they had defeated me. "Enjoy the house," I called back, my voice carrying clearly through the crisp morning air. "I truly hope you like the new owner." Then I rounded the corner and disappeared from view, leaving them standing there confused and completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already begun to collapse. I walked away from the house. The morning air was cold against my skin. The black Maybach waited exactly 2 blocks away, idling silently beside the curb. The driver stepped out immediately and opened the heavy rear door for me. I slid into the luxurious leather interior and let out a long, slow breath. The soundproof cabin instantly shut out the suburban morning, wrapping me in total silence. "Would you like me to turn on the radio, ma'am?" the driver asked respectfully while glancing at me through the rearview mirror. "Yes, please," I replied, staring through the tinted window as we drove away from the life I had just destroyed. The driver tapped the dashboard screen, and the speakers immediately filled with the energetic voices of Atlanta's most popular morning radio show. The host, famous for ruthless gossip and controversial interviews, was already mid-conversation. I froze the moment I recognized the guest sitting in the studio. It was Andre. "Man, it's a tragedy," Andre was saying, his voice soaked in fake emotion. He sounded like a completely devastated husband, a loyal man deeply betrayed. "You think you know somebody. You spend 10 years building a life with a woman, trying to give her the world, and then one day she just snaps." The radio host jumped in, sounding completely fascinated. "So what exactly happened at the anniversary dinner, Andre? The blogs are going crazy this morning. People are saying she threw a drink in your face and attacked your family." Andre released a loud, theatrical sigh. "Nia has been struggling with serious mental health problems for the past year. I tried to help her. My mother tried to help her, but she refused. Last night, she completely lost control. She fabricated those ridiculous medical documents to humiliate me in front of my investors. And to make matters worse, I discovered this morning that she's been having an affair with one of the contractors from her nonprofit organization. She even tried to steal money from my company so she could run away with him." I sat in the back of the Maybach with my jaw clenched so tightly my teeth hurt. The sheer audacity of his lies was unbelievable. He was running a classic smear campaign, completely reversing the roles of victim and abuser. And now he was using the theft daemon committed to frame me for embezzlement. All while playing the role of the heartbroken, betrayed husband live on the radio. My phone began vibrating violently in my pocket. I pulled it out and found the screen flooded with notifications. Text messages poured in from women in my church group, people I had worshipped beside every Sunday for 5 years. The messages were brutal. "We're praying for your soul, Nia, but Pastor Williams has asked that you step down from the youth ministry immediately. How could you do that to Andre? He's such a good man. You need serious psychiatric help." I watched in real time as people I once considered close friends unfollowed me on social media, blocked my number, and erased me from their lives based entirely on a 5-minute radio interview. Andre knew exactly what he was doing. In Atlanta's wealthy social circles, perception was reality. He was systematically isolating me, cutting off every support system and lifeline I had, making sure I had nowhere to turn and nowhere to hide. Then a voice message notification from Vivian appeared. I pressed play and lifted the phone to my ear. "Listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful little gutter rat," Vivian hissed through the speaker, completely stripped of her polished charm. "You are going to quietly sign the divorce papers my attorney sends you this afternoon. You will not ask for alimony. You will surrender every claim to the house and the cars. And if you try to fight us, or if you ever show your face near my son again, I will personally make sure the IRS audits your precious little charity from top to bottom. I'll leak stories to the press claiming you've been stealing donation money to fund your luxury lifestyle. I will destroy your reputation so completely that you won't even be able to get a job flipping burgers in this city. Sign the papers, Nia, and crawl back into the sewer where you belong. The message ended with a sharp click. I lowered the phone into my lap. A year ago, a threat like that from Vivian would have sent me into a complete panic attack. I would have cried, apologized, and begged for peace. But today, listening to her poisonous words, I felt nothing except a cold, calculating calm. I didn't respond to Vivian. I didn't text my church friends to defend myself. I simply turned my phone off and tossed it onto the empty seat beside me. The Maybach glided smoothly into the private underground garage of a luxury skyscraper in Midtown Atlanta. The driver escorted me to a fingerprint-secured private elevator that rose nonstop to the top floor. The stainless steel doors opened to reveal a breathtaking penthouse suite. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows displayed a stunning panoramic view of the entire city skyline. White marble floors gleamed beneath modern crystal chandeliers, and original contemporary artwork decorated the walls. Standing beside the enormous windows, gazing out over the city she practically owned, was my mother. Valerie Sterling was a force of nature. Even in the privacy of her own penthouse, she was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit, her hair flawless, her posture radiating absolute authority. She was a self-made billionaire, founder, and CEO of Vanguard Holdings, one of the most ruthless and successful venture capital firms on the East Coast. She turned when I entered the room. Her sharp, calculating eyes immediately locked onto the faint red bruise swelling across my left cheek where Andre had struck me. Her jaw tightened. For one brief second, the terrifying corporate titan disappeared, replaced by a fiercely protective mother. She walked to the kitchen island, poured a cup of black coffee from a silver French press, and handed it to me. Then she gently touched my cheek. "You should have let me crush that pathetic little boy the day you married him," Valerie said softly, though there was a dangerous edge beneath her voice. "I warned you his family was nothing but fake money and oversized egos." I took a sip of the bitter coffee, letting the warmth steady me. "I needed to know he loved me for me, Mom," I answered quietly. "Not for your money. Not for Vanguard. I just wanted a real family." Valerie sighed and crossed her arms. Our relationship had always been complicated, built on a foundation of pain we had only recently started repairing. When I was 7 years old, my father worked construction jobs, and we barely survived in the projects. Valerie had a brilliant mind for finance, but nobody on Wall Street would take a young poor black mother seriously. So she made the hardest and most ruthless decision imaginable. She packed her bags, left me with my father, and moved to New York to build her empire. She sacrificed motherhood to become a titan. For 20 years, I resented her for abandoning me. I refused her money, her connections, and even her last name. I built my own life and nonprofit organization because I wanted to prove I didn't need the mother who left me behind. It wasn't until my father died 3 years earlier that Valerie and I finally sat down together and truly looked at each other. She apologized. She admitted her failures. Slowly, we began rebuilding our relationship completely in secret. I hid Valerie's identity from Andre and everyone else because I was terrified of what billions of dollars and Vanguard Holdings would do to my marriage. I wanted Andre to look at me and see his equal, his partner, the woman who had helped build him from nothing. I knew that if he discovered my mother was a billionaire, he would never see me the same way again. He would only see a giant dollar sign. "You wanted a real family," Valerie repeated quietly, echoing my thoughts as she walked toward the elegant glass coffee table in the center of the living room. And instead, you ended up with a pack of rabid dogs who bit the hand that fed them for an entire decade. Valerie's sharp eyes locked onto mine. You're done playing the victim now, Nia. Are you finally ready to use the power that belongs to you? I set my coffee cup down on the side table. My gaze hardened as I looked at my mother. Yes, I said quietly. I'm completely done. Valerie smiled. It was the kind of brilliant, predatory smile that made Wall Street executives tremble inside their custom suits. She picked up a thin silver iPad from the glass table and walked back toward me. After tapping the screen a few times, she opened a highly confidential internal document stamped with the corporate logo of Vanguard Holdings. Then she handed me the tablet. I looked down at the glowing screen. It was a complete financial portfolio and executive summary for a new tech startup. Andre's tech startup. He submitted his final application for a $50 million seed investment from my firm first thing this morning, Valerie said, her voice dripping with dangerous amusement. His entire presentation is built on spotless financial records and a flawless public reputation. He's scheduled to walk into my boardroom on Thursday for the final approval meeting. Valerie stepped closer, staring directly into my eyes. He has absolutely no idea who I am. He has no idea the venture capital firm he's begging for money belongs to the mother of the woman he just assaulted. She tilted her head slightly. So tell me, sweetheart, what do you want to do to him? I stared at the glowing iPad in my hands, tracing the sharp edges of the Vanguard Holdings logo with my thumb. The screen illuminated the dark, quiet space between my mother and me. I want him to believe he's won, I said calmly. I want him to walk into your boardroom thinking he's the smartest man in the entire city. I want him to feel completely untouchable. And then I want to watch you destroy his world piece by piece. Valerie slowly smiled and took the tablet back from my hands. Consider it done, she said softly. 2 days later, the heavy glass doors of one of downtown Atlanta's most prestigious law firms slid open as I stepped into the aggressively air-conditioned reception area. The firm was infamous for representing wealthy clients in brutal, high-stakes divorce battles. Andre had hired their most notorious senior partner, a man named Harrison, who was widely known across the state for intimidating spouses into walking away with absolutely nothing. They instructed me to come alone. They thought I couldn't afford legal representation after Damon drained my bank accounts. They expected me to arrive looking broken and defeated, ready to surrender just to make the nightmare end. Instead, I walked into the glass-walled conference room wearing an immaculate charcoal gray tailored suit Valerie had bought for me the day before. My hair was pulled into a sleek professional bun, and I carried a simple leather briefcase. Andre was already seated at the enormous mahogany conference table. He wore a brand-new tailored navy suit with a gold tie clip reflecting the harsh ceiling lights. He looked like a king sitting confidently inside his own castle. The wounds to his ego from the restaurant incident had completely vanished, replaced by overflowing arrogance. Seated beside him was Harrison, a polished, sharp-eyed attorney with a predatory smile who evaluated my worth the moment I walked through the door. Take a seat, Nia, Andre said while motioning toward the empty leather chair across from him. He leaned back and laced his fingers behind his head in a display of total dominance. I'm glad you decided to be reasonable and show up. I was worried you'd have another one of your little mental episodes and refuse to cooperate. I calmly pulled out the chair and sat down, folding my hands neatly on the table. I'm perfectly fine, Andre. Let's just finish this. Harrison opened an expensive leather briefcase and removed a massive stack of legal documents, sliding them across the polished wood toward me. Then he tapped a gold pen against the papers. These are the finalized divorce decrees, asset waivers, and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, Harrison explained in a deeply condescending tone, as if speaking to a child. My client is being extraordinarily generous considering the emotional distress and public humiliation you caused him. He continued flipping through the documents. Mr. Sterling is willing to waive his right to sue you for defamation regarding those falsified medical records you displayed at your anniversary dinner. In exchange, you will sign this confidentiality agreement stating that you will never publicly discuss his medical history, business practices, or family. If you violate this agreement, we will bury you in litigation until you can no longer afford food. I glanced down at the thick stack of papers. No division of assets? I asked calmly. Andre leaned forward slowly, a cruel smile spreading across his face. No division of assets, Nia. You leave this marriage with exactly what you brought into it. Nothing. Damon already consolidated the corporate accounts, and they're fully protected under my startup structure. And as you can clearly see, the property waiver states that you surrender every claim to the suburban estate. The house stays with me. My mother is already picking out new wallpaper for the guest bedroom. He paused, clearly expecting me to break down crying or beg for mercy. When I remained completely silent, he twisted the knife even deeper. You should really sign the papers, Nia. You heard the radio interview, didn't you? The entire city thinks you're unstable. My investors are fully backing me. In fact, my company is doing better than ever. I've got a massive meeting tomorrow morning with Vanguard Holdings to finalize a $50 million seed investment. Once that money hits my accounts, I'm taking this company public. I'm going to become one of the richest men in Atlanta. Andre leaned back confidently in his chair, his smile dripping with arrogance. And if you try to fight me in court, I'll use that wealth to crush you. I'll drag this divorce out for years while you sleep in a bed at a homeless shelter. Sign the papers, and I'll let you walk away with your freedom. I stared at the man I had loved for 10 years. He was so consumed by greed and his desperate need to feel powerful that he couldn't even see the massive trap tightening around his ankles. He thought the suburban estate was his greatest asset. He thought forcing me out of that house was his ultimate victory. But Andre didn't know the truth about the property. 5 years earlier, I had started noticing strange discrepancies in our tax statements. Small amounts of money moved oddly between our joint savings and the accounts Damon managed. Whenever I questioned him, he brushed it off as routine corporate tax maneuvering. I never trusted him. And I knew I needed to protect the investment I personally made into that house, the down payment I had paid using my own hard-earned savings long before Andre earned his first real dollar. Without telling anyone in the family, I hired an independent financial advisor. Legally, I established a private shell company, a blind LLC registered in Delaware, where corporate ownership records were heavily protected and confidential. Then, under the excuse of an aggressive tax deduction strategy, I convinced Damon to draft a quitclaim deed. Andre, who famously never read boring legal paperwork and blindly trusted his brother, signed it without hesitation. Legally, he transferred full ownership of our entire suburban estate directly into my private LLC. Andre thought he owned the house. Damon thought he controlled the house. Vivian thought she ruled the house. But on paper, in the eyes of the federal government and the state of Georgia, I was the sole owner of the company that owned the property. The house had never truly belonged to Andre, which meant the property waiver Harrison had just pushed across the table was completely worthless. Andre legally could not force me to surrender rights to property that wasn't even in his name. I slowly reached forward and picked up the heavy gold pen Harrison had provided. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call Andre a liar or a thief. I simply turned to the final page of the massive stack of legal papers, pressed the gold tip to the signature line, and signed my name in smooth, elegant handwriting. Then I flipped to the confidentiality agreement. I signed that too. The NDA was meaningless anyway. I wasn't going to be the one exposing Andre's secrets to the public. My mother was. And Valerie Sterling certainly hadn't signed any confidentiality agreement. Finally, I reached the property waiver. I looked directly at the clause where I supposedly surrendered all rights to the sprawling colonial estate. Internally, I smiled. Then I signed that document too with a graceful flourish. I stacked the freshly signed papers neatly together and slowly slid them back across the polished mahogany table toward Harrison. The attorney looked completely stunned. He had clearly prepared for a screaming match. He had case law memorized, threats ready, financial intimidation prepared. Now he stared at the signed documents as though they were poisoned. Andre looked equally shocked at first, but his surprise quickly transformed into a swollen, triumphant grin. He burst into loud mocking laughter and actually applauded. Well, Andre bragged while taking the documents from his lawyer to inspect the signatures, I have to admit, Nia. I'm genuinely surprised. I thought you'd fight harder than this. I guess being broke and homeless finally taught you some respect. You finally realized you can't beat me. You were always smart when you listened to reason. I rose slowly from my chair, smoothing the front of my tailored suit jacket. Then I picked up my leather briefcase and tucked it carefully beneath my arm. I studied Andre's face, watching smug satisfaction radiate from every inch of him. He thought he had successfully erased me from his life. He thought tomorrow would make him rich, powerful, and untouchable. I leaned forward slightly, resting both hands against the edge of the polished mahogany table. Then I lowered my voice into a soft, almost conversational whisper. Good luck at your big meeting tomorrow, Andre. I truly hope everything goes perfectly for you. Andre smirked confidently and leaned farther back in his chair. Oh, it will. Like I said, I'm about to become a very rich man. I tilted my head slightly and offered him a sweet, deadly smile. Just make sure your books are perfectly clean for Vanguard. I heard they love surprise audits. Andre barked out another dismissive laugh and waved his hand at me as if brushing away an annoying insect. He completely ignored the warning, completely unaware that the steel jaws of the trap had already snapped shut around his neck. I turned and walked out of the conference room. The sharp clicks of my heels echoed through the glass hallway behind me. And I left Andre sitting there in his custom-made suit, clutching worthless legal documents and bragging about a future that had already been destroyed. The next morning at exactly 9 o'clock, the atmosphere inside Andre's downtown Atlanta tech startup headquarters was electric. The office itself was a masterpiece of artificial success. Andre had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen investment capital leasing the top floor of a premium glass skyscraper. The space featured exposed brick walls, imported Italian espresso machines, and minimalist white leather furniture carefully designed to make him look like the next visionary giant in financial technology. Inside the main glass-walled boardroom, the entire board of directors sat gathered around a massive marble conference table. Andre paced confidently at the head of the room, rehearsing his final presentation. He wore the same tailored navy blue suit from the law office, radiating an almost intoxicating level of false confidence. Adjusting his gold tie clip, he flashed a polished smile at the board members. "Gentlemen, this is the day everything changes," Andre announced proudly, his voice echoing across the glass walls. In exactly 2 hours, we walk into the regional offices of Vanguard Holdings. They're prepared to offer us a $50 million seed investment. Once that money hits our corporate accounts, we scale immediately. We take over the market. And every person sitting at this table becomes unbelievably rich. The board members applauded respectfully, murmuring excited approval. Seated at Andre's right side was Damon, his laptop open in front of him. Unlike his brother, Damon looked visibly tense. A thin sheen of sweat covered his forehead as his fingers rapidly tapped across the polished marble table while reviewing heavily manipulated financial spreadsheets. He had spent the entire night moving numbers around, constructing a tangled maze of fake shell accounts to hide the fact that the company was bleeding money and surviving almost entirely on the funds illegally stolen from my nonprofit organization. Just make sure the liquidity projections look flawless, Andre instructed while pointing at his brother. Vanguard is notorious for intense due diligence. I don't want any red flags when their analysts review our third-quarter projections. They're perfectly balanced, Damon replied quickly, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. I encrypted and buried the source of the recent capital injection behind 3 separate corporate firewalls. Nobody's going to find anything. The books look beautiful. The moment those words left Damon's mouth, the heavy double-glass doors to the boardroom suddenly burst open with a violent bang. Every conversation stopped instantly. Andre froze mid-step, irritation flashing across his face. A young receptionist stood in the doorway looking absolutely terrified, clutching a clipboard tightly against her chest. "Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry," she stammered nervously. "I tried to tell them they couldn't come back here without an appointment, but they completely ignored security." Before Andre could even ask who she meant, the receptionist was gently but firmly moved aside. A team of 6 people entered the boardroom. They did not look like friendly corporate investors. They moved with frightening military precision. Every one of them wore immaculate charcoal suits and carried heavy titanium briefcases. Their expressions were cold, blank, and unreadable. The man leading the group was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiated absolute authority. Without acknowledging the stunned board members, he walked directly toward the head of the marble table and passed straight by a confused Andre. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, removed a thick black leather folder, and slammed it onto the table with a heavy crack. "Risk Management and Compliance Division, Vanguard Holdings," the lead auditor announced, his deep voice effortlessly cutting through the tense silence. "We are initiating a full forensic audit of all corporate operations, digital assets, and financial records effective immediately. All individuals in this room are instructed to step away from their electronic devices now." Andre let out a sharp, awkward laugh and stepped forward with his hands raised. "Whoa, hold on a second," he said nervously. "There has to be some misunderstanding. Our final presentation meeting is scheduled at your regional office in 2 hours. We're fully prepared to provide every requested document. So you can't just storm into my headquarters and interrupt my board meeting." The lead auditor slowly turned his head toward Andre and fixed him with a stare so cold it felt capable of freezing water. "We do not wait for meetings, Mr. Sterling. And we certainly do not wait for suspects to hand us documents. Step away from the table." At that exact moment, Damon realized what was happening. All the color drained from his face instantly, leaving him pale as a ghost. He knew the second Vanguard's forensic auditors got access to his raw hard drives, they would immediately uncover the federal wire fraud, forged signatures, and stolen nonprofit funds. His entire life was about to collapse within minutes. The lead auditor immediately opened the thick black folder in his hands and began sliding printed documents across the marble table one by one. Over the last 72 hours, he announced coldly, "Our forensic team uncovered evidence of wire fraud, falsified accounting statements, tax manipulation, identity fraud, and the theft of federally regulated nonprofit funds connected to this company." Andre's smile vanished completely. Damon staggered backward in his chair, whispering under his breath, "No, no, that's impossible." But the auditor kept going. Multiple transfers were routed through shell accounts controlled by Damon Sterling. Those funds originated from a registered educational nonprofit organization serving underprivileged children in South Atlanta. Every board member slowly turned toward Damon. The room felt poisoned. Valerie finally sat down at the head of the table, crossing one leg over the other with terrifying calm. Then she spoke again. "Do you know what your biggest mistake was, Andre?" Andre swallowed hard. Valerie leaned forward slightly. "You thought Nia was weak because she was kind." Silence. "You mistook patience for helplessness, loyalty for stupidity, love for dependency." Her eyes hardened. "And worst of all, you put your hands on my daughter." The word daughter hit the room like an explosion. Several board members visibly froze. Andre blinked rapidly. "You're what?" For the first time since entering the room, Valerie smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone watching a building burn exactly the way they planned it. "Nia Sterling," Valerie said slowly, "is my daughter. My only child. And everything you built, every fake success, every investor dinner, every office in this building, was financed by opportunities she created for you." Andre's face strained completely white. "No," he whispered. Memories were clearly crashing into him all at once. Every time Nia calmly solved a crisis, every introduction she made, every donor she connected him with, every business strategy she quietly suggested. All the intelligence he took credit for. All the stability he assumed would always be there. Valerie continued. "You assaulted her publicly. Your brother stole from her nonprofit. Your mother attempted extortion and defamation. And then the three of you made the catastrophic mistake of believing she was alone." The lead auditor placed another document in front of Andre. "This is a federal seizure notice," he explained. "Effective immediately, all corporate accounts associated with Sterling Technologies are frozen pending criminal investigation." Another paper. "This is a warrant preservation order preventing the destruction or transfer of any company assets." Another. "And this is formal notice that Vanguard Holdings is permanently withdrawing all investment consideration." One of the board members suddenly stood up. "You told us the finances were clean," he shouted at Andre. Another slammed his fist on the table. "You said the nonprofit transfer was investor capital." Damon opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His hands were shaking violently. Andre looked around the room desperately, watching every ally he had begin distancing themselves from him in real time. His empire wasn't collapsing slowly anymore. It was detonating. Then the final blow came. Valerie turned calmly toward the glass wall overlooking the city skyline. "Nia," she said softly, "you can come in now." The boardroom doors opened once more. And I walked inside. Vivian let out a sharp laugh and adjusted the diamonds around her neck. She should be grateful we're even allowing her back into the house after the disgusting stunt she pulled, she sneered. Honestly, once the Vanguard deal closes, Andre needs to cut her loose permanently. There are daughters of senators and hedge fund managers lining up for him already. Chloe grinned. "And once the money hits, Damon and I are finally getting the lake house." Neither woman noticed the boutique manager quietly staring at the payment terminal. The transaction had failed. Again. "Mrs. Sterling," the manager said carefully. The card was declined. Vivian's smile vanished instantly. "That's impossible," she snapped. "Run it again." The manager obeyed nervously. Declined. A third attempt. Declined. Chloe shifted awkwardly in front of the mirror. Vivian forced a brittle laugh. "Bank fraud protection," she said loudly. "My son is closing a $50 million corporate merger this weekend. These institutions panic over large purchases." But before the manager could answer, Vivian's phone rang. Her expression darkened immediately when she saw the caller ID. "Private lender." She stepped away from the mirrors and answered in a hushed voice. "This is Vivian Sterling." The voice on the other end was cold. "Your collateral failed verification." Vivian froze. "What?" The property deed tied to your loan is invalid. Your son does not legally own the house used to secure the debt. The blood drained from her face. That's impossible, she whispered. We verified ownership through Delaware corporate filings this morning, the man continued. The property belongs to a private LLC. Vivian's knees nearly buckled. No, Andre owns that house. He does not. Silence. Then came the final blow. You have 72 hours to repay the full balance plus penalties. If payment is not received, collections become physical. The line went dead. Vivian slowly lowered the phone from her ear. For the first time in years, genuine fear entered her eyes. Not social embarrassment. Not gossip. Fear. Because unlike banks and investors, the men she borrowed from did not care about country clubs, charity galas, or last names. And at that exact same moment, across the city, I was standing in Valerie's penthouse dressing room while a couture designer zipped me into a custom black gown worth more than Vivian's entire fake jewelry collection. The dress fit like armor. Valerie stood behind me, watching my reflection in the mirror. This Saturday, she said calmly, every person who tried to bury you is going to walk willingly into their own execution. I met her eyes in the reflection. And Andre still thinks he's saving himself. Valerie smiled slowly. No, she corrected. He's entertaining us. Vivian let out a sharp, mocking laugh, taking another sip of champagne. Let her wear rags. The only reason Andre invited her is to secure the investors. Once the money is safely in his accounts, he can publicly get rid of her all over again. We are the real royalty of Atlanta, Chloe. This gala is our coronation. We're finally getting rid of that project trash for good. They clinked their crystal glasses together, completely intoxicated by their own toxic delusions. They were spending money that didn't exist, celebrating a victory they hadn't won, and mocking a woman who currently held their entire existence in the palm of her hand. Far away from the Sturl family's cheap suburban illusions, the real preparation for the gala was taking place high above the city. The penthouse was silent. Massive floor-to-ceiling windows displayed a panoramic view of Atlanta's glittering skyline. I stood on a small circular pedestal in the center of the master dressing room. The room glowed with warm, soft lighting. I was not wearing a clearance dress. The moment the gala was confirmed, my mother had flown in a haute couture designer directly from Paris. For the past 2 hours, the designer had been meticulously crafting a gown that was nothing short of a masterpiece. It was a midnight blue silk velvet creation, body-hugging and floor-length. The fabric absorbed the light, making me look like a living shadow, while thousands of tiny hand-sewn black Swarovski crystals cascaded across the bodice, catching the light like shattered glass. The gown featured a daring plunging neckline and a dramatic open back that radiated absolute confidence and lethal elegance. It was a $40,000 weapon disguised as evening wear. Valerie entered the room carrying a velvet jewelry box. She dismissed the designer with a polite nod, and the woman quietly exited the penthouse. Valerie walked behind me, studying our reflections side by side in the massive floor mirror. She reached forward and carefully zipped the heavy velvet gown closed. The fit was flawless. It transformed me completely. The exhausted, defeated wife who had stood in the rain outside the restaurant was gone forever. The woman staring back at me in the mirror was a titan. She was the rightful heir to a billion-dollar empire, and she was going to war. Valerie opened the velvet box, revealing a breathtaking diamond choker necklace. Vintage diamonds wrapped around my throat, the heavy icy stones resting against my collarbone. Your ex-husband called my office an hour ago, Valerie said softly, resting her hands on my bare shoulders. He practically begged my assistant to confirm that I'd be attending the gala to announce the partnership. He's incredibly proud of himself. He truly believes he manipulated you into saving his company. I stared at my reflection, watching the diamonds glitter against my dark skin. The image of Vivian and Chloe laughing at me. The memory of Andre's hand striking my face. The agonizing betrayal of Damon draining my nonprofit accounts. It all fueled the cold, steady fire burning in my chest. They wanted a show, I said, my voice dangerously low and completely devoid of mercy. Let's give them a blockbuster. Saturday night descended over the sprawling estate like a fog of arrogance. Andre had spared no expense. The driveway was lined with imported luxury sedans. Massive white event tents had been erected across the backyard lawn, glowing beneath crystal lanterns. Valets rushed back and forth while security guards checked the names of prominent politicians at the front gate. Waiters moved through the dense crowd carrying trays overflowing with champagne. Inside the grand foyer, Vivian presided over the gathering exactly as she had always dreamed. She stood near the majestic staircase wrapped in her expensive silver designer gown, laughing loudly while surrounded by wealthy investors' wives. Chloe stood beside her glowing with undeserved superiority in her emerald silk dress. They were intoxicated by the illusion of their approaching fortune, completely unaware that the guillotine was already being sharpened. At exactly 8 o'clock, a sleek black Maybach rolled through the security gate and stopped at the front entrance. The valet hurried forward and opened the heavy rear door. I stepped into the humid night air. The moment my silver heel touched the pavement, the atmosphere began to shift. As I climbed the concrete steps and walked through the double doors into the foyer, a heavy silence spread across the mansion. The string quartet playing softly in the corner faltered. Conversations abruptly died mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to people's lips. Every eye in the crowded room locked onto me. I was no longer the quiet wife who kept her head down. I was a vision of absolute power. The midnight blue velvet gown clung perfectly to my figure. Thousands of black Swarovski crystals captured the ambient light. The vintage diamond choker rested heavily against my skin, radiating a blinding wealth that eclipsed everything else in the room. I walked with my head high, my expression a mask of cold authority. Vivian noticed the sudden silence. She turned with a condescending remark already loaded on her tongue, but the words died instantly in her throat. Her jaw loosened. Chloe dropped her tiny clutch purse onto the hardwood floor. They stared at me as if they had just seen a ghost carrying a king's ransom. But Vivian, driven by decades of toxic habits, quickly regained her composure. Her shock transformed into bitterness. She saw an opportunity to humiliate me, to remind me of my place. Vivian gestured toward a young woman standing near the bar. The woman wore a tight red dress and an oversized diamond pendant necklace. It was Kendra, the mistress Andre had been flaunting all over the city. Vivian grabbed Kendra by the arm and dragged her toward me, intentionally attracting the attention of nearby journalists. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Vivian announced loudly, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness designed to mask her cruelty. "I'm shocked you had the nerve to walk through those doors, Nia. I see you managed to rent yourself a nice dress for the evening. Did you put it on installments?" Chloe snorted loudly behind her mother. Vivian shoved Kendra forward, ignoring my icy silence. "Since you're here, Nia, I thought it was only appropriate that you meet the future of the family. This is Kendra. She's everything Andre has always wanted in a woman, beautiful, sophisticated, and capable of giving him the children you never could." Kendra offered a smug smile. She lifted her hand and touched the massive diamond pendant resting against her chest. "Andre bought this for me yesterday," Kendra bragged loudly enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "He said I deserved something that actually matched my value. No hard feelings, I hope." A crowd had formed around us. People whispered, waiting for the humiliated ex-wife to burst into tears and flee. I didn't flinch. I looked at Vivian, then slowly shifted my gaze toward Kendra. I let my eyes deliberately travel over the flashy red dress before finally settling on the massive glittering pendant hanging around her neck. Then I laughed softly. It was an elegant sound completely devoid of warmth, echoing clearly through the quiet foyer. Hard feelings? I asked calmly, my voice dangerously serene. Why would I have hard feelings, Kendra? Honestly, I feel sorry for you. Kendra's smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by deep confusion. Excuse me, she snapped. I stepped forward slowly, invading her personal space completely. I lifted one perfectly manicured finger and pointed directly at the enormous stone resting against her collarbone. My mother taught me how to evaluate rare assets, I said softly. And I have an impeccable eye. I tilted my head slightly. He told you this necklace matched your value? Kendra swallowed nervously. Well, I continued smoothly. He was right. It's completely fake. Kendra gasped, instantly clutching the stone. That's a lie. Andre bought this at a premier jewelry store. I slowly shook my head, offering her a smile filled with devastating pity. A premier jeweler would never mount a stone with such an obvious cloud inclusion. And the light refraction is completely wrong. Real diamonds bend light sharply. That stone scatters light like a cheap disco ball. I leaned slightly closer. It's cubic zirconia. He bought it from a mall kiosk using a credit card he can't afford. Several people in the crowd gasped. A well-known socialite standing nearby leaned closer to inspect the necklace herself, silently confirming my assessment. Kendra's face turned crimson red. Then I shifted my attention back to Vivian, who now looked absolutely furious. I slowly looked her up and down, taking in the silver designer gown she had charged to a maxed-out credit card. And you, I continued, my voice carrying lethal authority, are standing in a house that doesn't belong to you, wearing a dress you cannot afford, trying to intimidate a woman who no longer cares whether you exist. I paused. You aren't old money, Vivian. You're just old debt. The silence became suffocating. I offered her one final smile. I suggest you enjoy the champagne tonight. It'll be the last expensive thing you drink. Vivian opened her mouth to scream at me. Her face twisted with absolute fury. But a sudden burst of microphone feedback echoed through the mansion, interrupting her completely. Everyone turned toward the massive ballroom. At the far end of the room, a brightly illuminated stage had been constructed beneath two enormous digital screens displaying the Vanguard Holdings corporate logo. Standing in the center of the stage, gripping the microphone stand tightly, was Andre. And he looked terrible. Despite the tailored suit, he was sweating profusely. His face was pale, and his eyes darted nervously across the massive crowd. Then he saw me standing in the foyer, and the sheer impact of my appearance hit him like a physical blow. He blinked hard, completely unable to comprehend that the powerful, radiant woman dripping in diamonds was the same wife he had discarded just days ago. But Andre had no time to process the shock. The media cameras were already recording. The investors were waiting. He had a gun to his head, and Valerie Sterling was holding the trigger. Ladies and gentlemen, Andre stammered into the microphone. His voice lacked its usual arrogant thunder. His hands trembled so badly that the microphone rattled against its stand. Thank you all for coming tonight. We are here to celebrate a massive milestone for my company. Tonight, we officially join forces with one of the most powerful financial entities on the East Coast. The crowd applauded politely, waiting for the big reveal. Andre wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. He searched desperately through the crowd for his savior. I would like to invite the CEO of Vanguard Holdings to the stage, Andre announced, his voice cracking slightly under the immense pressure. Please join me in welcoming Miss Valerie Sterling." The room erupted into applause. Valerie emerged from the VIP section near the front of the stage. She wore a flawless, tailored black evening suit, looking every inch the ruthless billionaire she truly was. She climbed the short staircase, her expression unreadable. Andre stepped back, offering her a desperate, pleading smile. He silently handed her the microphone, begging her to make the $50 million announcement that would save his life. Valerie walked to the center of the stage and took the microphone from his trembling hand. She did not look at him. She did not smile at the cheering crowd. Instead, she stood perfectly still, her posture radiating terrifying authority. The applause slowly faded, replaced by an uncomfortable, expectant silence. Valerie lifted the microphone to her lips and stared directly into the crowd. Her piercing gaze swept across the faces of wealthy elites, politicians, and finally settled on me standing at the back of the room. The execution was about to begin. Valerie held the microphone close, the cold metal reflecting the glow of the stage lights. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute, heavy with the collective expectation of a $50 million announcement. Andre stood several feet away from her, a desperate, sweaty smile frozen on his face. He nodded eagerly, silently urging her to say the words that would save his pathetic life. Instead of looking at him, Valerie raised her free hand and gave a sharp, deliberate nod toward the audiovisual technicians stationed at the back of the room. The massive digital screens flanking the stage flickered instantly. The crowd murmured in anticipation, expecting to see the sleek and powerful logo of Vanguard Holdings. But the corporate logo never appeared. The screens remained black for a fraction of a second before flashing into brilliant high definition. It was security camera footage. The timestamp in the lower right corner clearly showed it was recorded exactly 10 days earlier. The location was instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with Atlanta's upscale dining scene. It was the private lobby of Belmont Restaurant. The footage was crystal clear. It showed me exiting the dining room doors completely composed, then Andre bursting through the doors right behind me. The camera captured everything in brutal detail. It showed him grabbing my wrist with violent force. It showed the terrifying rage twisting his face. And then, in front of a ballroom filled with his most important investors, loyal fraternity brothers, and the same church elders who had condemned me, the video showed Andre raising his heavy hand and brutally slapping me across the face. A collective scream of horror tore through the ballroom. The sound of hundreds of people gasping at once was deafening. Champagne glasses shattered against the wooden floor as guests physically recoiled in shock. The illusion of the perfect charming gentleman was instantly and permanently annihilated. On the screens, the silent footage replayed in a loop, showing the violent assault over and over again. Every time his hand connected with my cheek, the wealthy crowd flinched. Andre stood frozen on stage, his mouth hanging open in absolute terror. He looked frantically from the screens to the crowd, realizing the horrible secret he thought he had buried was now playing on a giant loop for the entire city to see. Valerie finally spoke into the microphone, her voice slicing through the panicked whispers like a sharpened blade. "You were all invited here tonight to celebrate the character and vision of Andre Sterling," Valerie announced, her tone dripping with lethal contempt. "You were told a story about a brilliant innovator and devoted family man who was tragically betrayed by an unstable wife. But institutional investors do not deal in fairy tales. We deal in absolute truth. And the truth is that the man standing on this stage is a violent and manipulative coward." Andre lunged toward the edge of the stage, waving his arms frantically. "Turn it off," he screamed, his voice breaking hysterically. "That video is altered. It's a deep fake. Somebody shut those screens off right now." Nobody moved. The audio-visual technicians, who were actually private contractors hired directly by Vanguard Holdings, completely ignored his desperate orders. Valerie ignored his outburst entirely. She gestured toward the technicians again. The violent security footage instantly disappeared, replaced by high-resolution scans of medical documents. On the left side of the screen was the fake infertility diagnosis Vivian had proudly displayed at the anniversary dinner. On the right side was the authentic, verified medical record from the urology clinic, clearly highlighting Andre's name and his irreversible sterility. For years, this man allowed his mother to publicly and privately torture his wife for failing to produce an heir, Valerie continued, her voice echoing powerfully through the horrified ballroom. When his wife finally discovered the truth that he was biologically incapable, he physically assaulted her to protect his fragile ego. Then he appeared on a popular morning radio show and lied to this entire city, claiming she had suffered a mental breakdown. I watched the crowd from my position near the foyer. I saw the faces of the women from my church group, the same women who had sent me cruel messages and demanded I step down from youth ministry. Now they stared at the medical records on the giant screens, their faces pale with shame. They had eagerly participated in my public stoning, blindly trusting a man who had orchestrated the entire smear campaign. But Valerie wasn't finished. She was methodically dismantling every pillar of Andre's existence, and she was saving the financial execution for last. The screen changed for the third time. The medical records were replaced by complex and undeniable financial ledgers. Red highlights illuminated massive illegal wire transfers, routing numbers, and forged signature cards. The digital trail of Damon's desperate accounting tricks was exposed for every expert in the room to analyze. You believe you are standing in the home of a wildly successful tech executive, Valerie said, walking toward the edge of the stage to directly address the lead investors. You believe his startup is fully funded and ready to revolutionize the market. You believe the charming lies he fed you during private golf games and expensive dinners. She pointed toward the screens. Look carefully at those ledgers, gentlemen. Look at the true source of his recent capital injections. The silver-haired lead investor pulled a pair of reading glasses from his suit pocket and squinted at the enormous screen. He stepped forward, shoving past a waiter to get a better look at the routing numbers. His face instantly drained of blood, his wealthy confidence replaced with pure panic. My God, the investor whispered loudly, his voice echoing through the horrified silence. That's an account belonging to a registered educational nonprofit. He stole from a charity. That's correct, Valerie confirmed, her voice ringing with absolute authority and sealing Andre's doom. 2 days ago, Andre's CFO, his own brother Damon, used unauthorized backdoor access to divert $840,000 from a charitable fund intended to provide school supplies for underprivileged children. She paused. He forged a legal signature, laundered the stolen money through 3 separate shell corporations, and deposited it directly into the corporate accounts of this tech startup. Valerie's eyes swept across the ballroom. This entire company is a criminal enterprise. The ballroom immediately descended into absolute chaos. Investors began shouting frantically at one another while pulling out their phones to call aggressive legal teams. The horrifying realization that they had unknowingly tied their fortunes and spotless corporate reputations to a massive federal wire fraud scheme sent a wave of pure panic through the wealthy crowd. Men in expensive tuxedos practically shoved one another to get away from the stage. Near the back of the room, Damon realized his life was over. The arrogant accountant who had mocked me on the porch suddenly looked like a terrified child. He dropped his expensive cocktail glass, spun around, and tried to sprint toward the side exit hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain. He barely made it 3 steps before 2 enormous, broad-shouldered security guards in dark suits stepped directly into his path, blocking his escape and grabbing him firmly by the arms. Vivian, who had been strutting through the foyer like royalty only minutes earlier, collapsed onto a velvet bench near the grand staircase. She clutched at her chest. Her silver designer dress suddenly looked like a very expensive prison uniform. She watched her golden son, the son she had worshipped and protected his entire life, being completely destroyed in front of the most powerful people in the state. Chloe stood beside her mother, frozen in shock. Her arrogant smile had vanished permanently. Andre was completely unraveling. The sophisticated and charming CEO was gone, replaced by a cornered and desperate animal. His entire reality had shattered in less than 3 minutes. The $50 million deal was officially dead. His flawless public reputation was ruined. His wealthy investors were fleeing the property, and he was staring directly down the barrel of a long federal prison sentence. She walked out through the massive front doors, leaving the chaos behind her. The cool night air felt unbelievably refreshing against her skin. Red and blue emergency lights flashed violently across the sprawling driveway, painting the wet pavement in streaks of color while federal agents moved in and out of the mansion like shadows. Behind her, the sterling empire was collapsing in real time. Guests in designer gowns and expensive tuxedos hurried toward their cars, desperate to escape before reporters arrived. Politicians who had once proudly shaken Andre Sterling's hand now avoided even looking in his direction. Investors barked furious orders into their phones, trying to salvage their reputations before the scandal consumed them too. Nia descended the stone staircase slowly, every step calm and controlled. Valerie followed closely beside her, elegant and untouchable in black silk. Neither woman looked back at the mansion immediately. There was no need. The screams, the sirens, and the crashing sounds from inside told the entire story. Andre stumbled through the front doorway moments later. He looked destroyed. His custom navy suit hung crookedly off his body, soaked with sweat and wrinkled beyond repair. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot from panic and humiliation. The confident tech CEO was gone forever. What remained was a broken man watching his entire life burn down around him. "Nia," he shouted desperately. His voice cracked across the driveway. She stopped walking, but didn't turn around immediately. Andre hurried forward, nearly slipping on the wet pavement before collapsing to his knees again several feet behind her. Federal agents watched him carefully but didn't interfere. He wasn't important anymore. He was already finished. "Nia, please," he begged hoarsely. "Please don't leave like this." Slowly, she turned to face him. The diamonds around her neck glimmered beneath the flashing police lights. Her midnight blue velvet gown flowed softly in the cold wind, making her look less like a woman and more like judgment itself. Andre stared at her with shattered eyes. "How? How is any of this real?" he whispered. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" Nia's expression never changed. "Would it have mattered?" she asked quietly. Andre opened his mouth, but no words came out. Because they both knew the truth. If she had arrived with billions attached to her name from the beginning, he would have treated her like a trophy instead of a burden. His mother would have worshipped her instead of humiliating her. Chloe would have envied her instead of mocking her. Their love had only existed when they believed she was beneath them. And that truth was uglier than anything else revealed that night. Tears streamed down Andre's face. "I made mistakes," he whispered weakly. "But I can change. I swear I can fix this." Nia looked at him for a long moment, completely emotionless. Then she stepped closer. Andre's breathing became shaky with hope. But her voice was ice cold when she finally spoke. "No, Andre," she said softly. "You're finally meeting the consequences of your actions. That's not the same thing as changing. The words hit harder than any scream ever could. Andre lowered his head, trembling violently. Behind him, two FBI agents emerged from the mansion carrying boxes of seized files and computer hard drives. One of the agents approached carefully. "Mr. Sterling," the agent said firmly. "We need you inside for additional questioning." Andre looked up at Nia one final time. He searched desperately for mercy, for hesitation, for some remaining fragment of the woman who once loved him enough to stand beside him in the rain. But she was gone. Not destroyed. Reborn. Valerie placed a hand gently against her daughter's shoulder. "The car is waiting," she said calmly. Nia gave a small nod. Andre watched helplessly as she turned away from him without another word. The driver opened the back door of the black Maybach, and she slid inside gracefully while Valerie entered after her. The door closed. Silent. Final. As the luxury car pulled away from the estate, Nia looked out the tinted window one last time. Federal agents swarmed the mansion. Reporters were already arriving at the gates. Andre stood frozen beneath the flashing lights while his mother screamed hysterically somewhere inside the house. And above it all, looming against the dark Atlanta sky, the Sterling mansion looked less like a home now, and more like a monument waiting to be demolished. As my mother and I stepped into the waiting Maybach, I lowered the tinted window just enough to witness the final act of the Sterling family tragedy unfolding across the sprawling front lawn. Andre was being forcibly escorted out of the mansion by two federal agents. He stood in the center of the driveway with absolutely nothing left except the sweat-stained suit he was wearing. A heavy tow truck was already hooking up his leased sports car while another agent slapped a federal seizure notice directly onto the windshield of his luxury SUV. His corporate bank accounts had been completely frozen, and his personal credit cards had already been flagged for fraud. A group of his former investors, the same men who had been eating expensive catered dinners only an hour earlier, surrounded him near the front entrance. The silver-haired lead investor jabbed a furious finger into Andre's chest, screaming that his legal team would sue him into absolute oblivion by Monday morning. They promised to take every cent he earned for the rest of his miserable life. But the most pathetic scene of all was his own family. Vivian and Chloe had been unceremoniously thrown out of the house by the private security team. The illusion of their unbreakable family loyalty had completely evaporated. Vivian stood on the manicured lawn, her $12,000 dress stained with dirt, hysterically screaming at her son. She beat her clenched fists violently against his broad shoulders, sobbing and blaming him for the $2 million debt she now owed to ruthless criminals. Chloe joined in, shrieking that Andre had ruined her life and destroyed their family name. Atlanta's golden boy was now public enemy number one in his own front yard, abandoned, bankrupt, and facing federal prison. I rolled the window back up, silencing their screams completely, and the Maybach disappeared into the night. 6 months later, the bitter chaos of that suburban nightmare had been completely replaced by the warm golden sunlight of spring in downtown Atlanta. I stood on a beautifully decorated wooden stage, holding an oversized pair of ceremonial scissors. Behind me rose a massive, newly renovated state-of-the-art brick building. Bold golden letters above the glass entrance proudly read, "The Nia Foundation for Educational Excellence." I hadn't used a single dollar from Vanguard Holdings to build this dream. When the federal investigation finally settled, Damon confessed to everything in exchange for a reduced plea deal. Every stolen dollar was traced, recovered, and returned to the nonprofit accounts he had emptied. But I didn't stop there. The destruction Andre caused became the foundation for something greater. Hundreds of children from underfunded neighborhoods across Atlanta now had access to scholarships, tutoring programs, technology labs, counseling services, and safe educational spaces that never would have existed otherwise. The foundation wasn't built from revenge. It was built from survival. A massive crowd gathered in front of the stage: reporters, city officials, educators, parents, and dozens of smiling children wearing uniforms embroidered with the foundation's gold crest. Camera flashes sparkled constantly beneath the bright afternoon sun. Valerie stood beside me, elegant as always, but for the first time since I had known her, her expression looked genuinely peaceful. "You turned pain into legacy," she said quietly. I looked out over the crowd. 6 months ago, those same media outlets had called me unstable, dramatic, and mentally broken. Now they stood waiting for my speech. Funny how quickly the world changes when the truth becomes impossible to bury. I stepped toward the microphone as the crowd settled into silence. For a brief moment, memories flashed through my mind. The rain outside the restaurant, the slap across my face, the humiliation, the betrayal, the gala, the federal raid, Andre on his knees begging for mercy. And then I looked at the children standing in the front row smiling up at me with hope in their eyes. That was the difference between us. Andre built his empire to feed his ego. I built mine so no one would ever have to survive what I survived alone. I lifted the ceremonial scissors with a calm smile. The crowd erupted into applause as the golden ribbon stretched tightly across the entrance doors. And this time, the entire city was cheering for me. My stolen funds were fully restored with substantial interest, and the aggressive divorce settlement handled by my mother's legal team stripped Andre of every remaining hidden asset to compensate for the emotional and financial damage he caused me. I took that money, the wealth I had earned through my own blood, sweat, and tears over a decade of relentless work, and invested it directly back into my community. Hundreds of people gathered in the vibrant courtyard. There were local business owners, supportive city council members, educators, mentors, and most importantly, dozens of young children from South Atlanta who finally had a safe, technologically advanced place to learn, grow, and build limitless futures for themselves. I looked to my right. Valerie Sterling stood beside me, not as the terrifying billionaire corporate titan the world feared, but simply as my mother. She wore a beautiful yellow summer dress and smiled with a level of genuine pride and peace that no corporate victory had ever given her before. Over the past 6 months, we had truly healed our fractured past, building a relationship rooted in honesty, mutual respect, and unwavering trust. I stepped toward the wooden podium, gazing out over the beautiful sea of faces before me. The microphone carried my voice clearly across the courtyard. For a long time, I believed my worth was tied to my ability to endure pain. I began making eye contact with the young women sitting in the front row. I thought being a strong woman meant silently carrying the weight of a family that constantly tried to break me apart. I allowed people who hated my roots to dictate my future. I dimmed my brilliance to make a weak man feel powerful. I paused, taking a slow, cleansing breath. The air smelled like freshly blooming dogwood flowers. But I'm here to tell you today that true power has absolutely nothing to do with the family you marry into. It has nothing to do with the expensive zip code you live in, the designer clothes you wear, or the approval of people determined to misunderstand you. True power is waking up every single day and refusing to let anyone extinguish your light. It's knowing that the blood in your veins comes from generations of resilient, unbreakable women who survived far worse so that you could stand here today. I looked directly into the crowd. To every woman listening to this, especially my beautiful Black sisters, who are so often expected to carry the world on their backs, hear me clearly. You are not a charity case. You are not a stepping stone for someone else's ego. Never shrink yourself to fit inside rooms too small to contain your greatness. And when people tell you that you do not belong at their table, do not sit on the floor begging for scraps. A slow smile spread across my face. Walk out the door. Build your own table. And invite the people who truly understand your worth to sit beside you. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. I stepped away from the podium, lifted the ceremonial scissors, and cut through the thick red ribbon in one clean motion. Cheers exploded across the courtyard. Children laughed and ran toward the entrance of the new center, while cameras flashed nonstop beneath the warm spring sunlight. And for the first time in a very long time, my future belonged entirely to me. The sound was pure joy, erasing completely the last lingering ghosts of my past. I am Nia. I am whole. I am completely free, and my story is only just beginning. The main lesson of Nia's journey is that her self-worth should never be determined by toxic people who refuse to value her. For years, Nia dimmed her brilliance to protect a fragile ego and endured abuse in order to fit into a family obsessed with superficial status. She proved that true power does not come from marrying into wealth or seeking validation from abusers. It comes from knowing your absolute worth, maintaining financial independence, and having the courage to walk away from tables where respect is no longer served. Have you ever walked away from a toxic relationship to reclaim your power? Share your story in the comments below and click subscribe.